Looking to make a warm first impression? In this video, I'll show you how to craft this layered oak and sapele welcome sign using just a scroll saw. From cutting clean curves to finishing that crisp contrast, you'll get every step from pattern to wall ready. Let's get started. I'm going to start with the 1/2 inch thick sapele backer. I already had a number 5 Pegasus modified geometry blade in the saw, and that's perfect for this pattern. I determined the blade size by considering the hardness and thickness of the wood, as well as the complexity of the pattern. The harder and thicker the wood, the larger the number I choose. The more complex the pattern, the lower the blade number. All three of the factors are medium on the scales for this piece, so I chose a number 5 blade. You could go small as a number 3 and as large as a number 7 if you prefer. My choices are somewhat subjective, so you may choose a different size blade than I do. I'll link my video on the subject on the screen and in the description. The middle of one of the sides provided a good starting place. I prefer to start cutting along a straight line or at an intersection whenever possible. I'll cut the entire perimeter of the backer and then back here with the blade meeting the first line at a 90-degree angle. It will leave a nice sharp point. If I'm forced to start on a curve, I frequently end up with a slight bump at the end because the blade has wandered slightly from the middle of the cut line. It's usually easy enough to fix, but I'd rather prevent it from happening. I'm almost constantly moving the wood to cut this piece due to the irregular shape of the edge. While the overall shape is oval, the edge is a combination of straight lines and curves featuring numerous sharp points. It's not difficult as it falls within the range of a beginner's skills, but it does require exceptional attention to detail. Cutting the curves doesn't require much explanation. For a pattern like this, I concentrate on cutting right on the line. Cutting the sharp points is where knowledge of technique comes in handy. I cut to the point where I need to change the cutting direction, stop cutting, and back up slightly. I keep the blade running and use the saw blade curve just created, plus the waste area on the outside of the pattern to turn the wood. Once it's facing in the new direction I want to cut, I put pressure on the workpiece and start pushing it into the blade again. It's almost more complicated to describe how to make sharp turns like this than it is to make them. It's expensive, but I'll show you why I like to use scroll saw tape to attach patterns to wood. It's a two-sided tape which you roll onto the wood and then cut to size. You then peel off the backing and attach the pattern. When you're done cutting, the tape and pattern peel off easily together. With the 1/2 inch thick sapele backer complete, I'm ready to move on to cutting the 1/4 inch thick oak top piece. This piece is thin and oak has a medium to high hardness. The detail is a bit intricate, so I switched to a number 3 Pegasus modified geometry blade. I'll start with the inside cuts first, beginning at the top with one of the design accents. I almost always make all the interior cuts before I make the external cut. The reasons for this are that it's usually easier to grip and maneuver the full-size workpiece, and mainly because the interior cuts weaken the wood. Therefore, it's beneficial to have the extra material around the outside until you reach the end. The best place to start cutting this odd shape is where the curved line leading off to the left meets the circle. I purposely drilled the pilot hole there because it appeared to be a perfect starting point. I usually cut in a clockwise direction, and from the pilot hole, I cut to the nearest line and followed it. This shape is mostly gentle curves with a few sharp points added for variety. I find it to be eye-catching, and with 4 of these patterns, they'll balance out nicely. I cut out the matching pattern on the other side of the top, and now I'm ready to cut the large letters that spell out welcome. I drilled the pilot hole near the upper part of the letter, and I cut from the pilot hole to the top corner. I stopped at the point where the lines met, backed off the pressure on the blade slightly, and used the saw blade curve just created, along with the waste area, to turn the workpiece in the new direction I wanted to cut. Then I applied pressure to the blade again and resumed cutting. I cut down past that line, followed it as if it were an invisible line to a point on the bottom. From there, I used the same technique as at the top to turn the workpiece 90 degrees, cutting across the bottom. At the next corner, I once again stopped cutting by slightly easing off pressure on the blade, used the curve plus waste to make the turn, and then started cutting up toward the top of the W. The turn there led to the upper left side of the letter. I removed the waste piece because it would be in the way, and I went down to the bottom of the W for the next parts of the cut. I first made the angled cut, stopping at the intersection. Then I cut the parallel line, making the sharp turn at the top and following that short line across. I made that sharp turn using the same technique as before, then followed the line down and continued following it as if there were an invisible line cutting to a corner at the bottom. I think you have the idea by now. This isn't the only way I could have cut this letter. I could have started in the same place and followed the line from point to point, making the turns in the same manner, but sometimes these very shallow angle cuts are difficult to make, so approaching them in the way I did here is the easier way to make the cuts. I figure it's my job to teach you the different ways cuts can be made. Then it's up to you to decide which techniques and approaches you are most comfortable using. The word welcome is in what I would call a semi-cursive script, in that the letters are rounded but not connected. In one way, this makes them even easier to cut as they're mostly curves and have few sharp angles. In another way, starting and stopping a cut on a curve has its challenges. If you're even the tiniest bit off at the start and stop point, you can end with a slight bump. But if that happens, you have three options for dealing with it. The first is to ignore it because it's minimal and unlikely that anyone but you will notice it. The second is that you can use the blade to run against it and smooth it out. The third is to go back later and remove it with a small file or piece of sandpaper. The letter L has two 90-degree corners at the top, and I'll show you an easy way to make one of those 90-degree turns at the top of the letter. I cut from the pilot hole directly to the point in the upper right corner. Rather than immediately starting the turn, I backed the blade to the pilot hole, spun the workpiece 180 degrees, and then backed the blade dull side first into the corner. The workpiece now only needs to be moved a short spin to line up the blade to cut the side of the L. The next part of the cut is a long straight line that curves at the bottom, since this is a cursive script. I followed the line back to the top of the letter where there was another 90-degree turn. This time, I eased up on the pressure when I reached the corner, using the saw blade curve in the waist area to make the turn. Then I pushed the workpiece back into the blade to make the final cut along the line at the top, completing the L. I didn't have any new tips to pass along while cutting the come out of welcome, so I'll move on to the bottom phrase, to our home. These words are spelled out in a stencil font, and the font is something you're likely to come across frequently if you do as much scroll sawing as I do. There are several tips to help you cut this part of the project. The first thing is to know that the letters are what I would call blocky, not fancy, so they contain plenty of 90-degree angles. The letter T is a perfect example. It's nothing but right angles. I cut from the pilot hole to the corner of the T's crossbar. I used my most common technique of cutting to a corner, backing up slightly, just enough so the blade's no longer cutting, then using the saw blade curve just created, plus the waist area, to turn the workpiece in the direction I needed to cut next. After that, I applied pressure and resumed cutting. For the letter T, I repeated this procedure at every intersection until the letter was complete. The O will illustrate my other tips for cutting letters in stencil fonts. The letters on this project are large, so it's not as critical here, but when the letters are smaller, it's very important to ensure the two halves of the letter don't touch. If that happens, the middle falls out of the O, and your project is possibly ruined. I solved this problem by cutting on the inside rather than right on the lines. This produces a slight increase in separation between the parts of the letter. The same is true of letters like A, R, and so on. The other problem you avoid by cutting on the inside of the letter rather than right on the line has to do with the separation between letters. We're accustomed to seeing small spaces between letters of a word, and if that spacing isn't maintained, the letters may appear slightly off. A person could probably not even tell what was wrong. The letters just wouldn't look right. I did a bit of sanding last night with a quarter sheet of 150 grit sandpaper to clean up those little fuzzies you get on the bottom of the cut. I buy glue in gallon bottles because it's cheaper that way, and I use that large bottle to refill medium and small-sized applicators like this one that originally held Elmer's school glue. I like the bottle because it has a small tip. You want to get glue on as much of the top layer as possible without squeeze out onto the bottom layer. This white glue dries clear, but the finish doesn't adhere to any places that have glue on them. After putting a bead of glue wherever I could, I used my fingertip to spread the glue evenly. I carefully aligned the top layer in the air before placing it down onto the backer. I wanted to avoid spreading glue onto areas where it was not needed, creating a problem with the finish later. Once I was satisfied with the placement, I added spring clamps. I started with one at each end of the oval, added one in the middle of each side, and then filled in with more clamps. I like to use spring clamps for tasks like this because they're easy to use and less likely to cause parts to slip around as the first couple of clamps are added. If I used F clamps, I'd have to watch closely to prevent that from happening. Please let me know in the comments which clamps you would use for this glue. Would it be spring clamps, F clamps, or something else? That's the end of another project. After I finished this one, I took it to my retail store to sell. My front counter is near a large window, and I saw the sign for the first time in daylight rather than artificial light. I was amazed. The color and green of that red oak are stunning. I showed it to someone else, and she was transfixed as well. So I immediately found a proper place and hung the sign near the front of the store. Not long after, I was doing something in the back, and I heard a small crash. I was almost afraid to look, but my fears were confirmed. It was the welcome sign. It had fallen to the tiled floor and 3 small pieces had broken off the front. I was a little sick about it, but I glued it back together, and I don't think anyone but me will ever notice the piece had been damaged. What do you think?